I'm a big fan of MMOs, like the Elder Scrolls Online, which you probably know by now if you've seen this channel before, but I've actually been keeping my eye on something new in the MMO space that for some reason nobody is really talking about. That's because there is a secret MMO currently in development from one of the biggest and most experienced MMO studios in the world, which I think has the potential to be something truly great. So what is this secret project all about, and when might we actually see it release? I'll dive into everything we know so far in this video, plus my take on what this means for MMO fans and what can we expect to see in this new title. Before we jump into it, a quick word from today's video sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the world's most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made and is available to play now for free on PC and consoles. With the ability to play over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s all the way to fighter jets and main battle tanks of today in dynamic, combined arms PvP combat. Every vehicle is insanely detailed and modeled down to their individual components like engines, fuel tanks, weapons, and crew, which adds another layer of realism and strategy. Plus, War Thunder offers tons of different customization options, allowing players to choose from countless camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all types of vehicles, including community-created ones. There's simply no game better suited for fans of military history or combat in general, and you can join a worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles today. So to play War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox, use my link in the pinned comment or the video's description to sign up. The new players and those who haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account access. It's all available for a limited time only, so get started now using my link below, and thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. So the new MMO project I am talking about here comes from ZeniMax Online Studios, the studio behind the Elder Scrolls Online, an MMO which has been around for 10 plus years at this point. Now, I know people have a wide range of opinions about ESO as a game, which I understand, but its success can't actually be denied at this point. I mean, a live service game that has lasted for 10 plus years is of course a big achievement in the gaming industry, especially nowadays, and with over $2 billion in confirmed revenue, 20 plus million players gained over its lifetime, it's pretty much a case study in how to deliver a successful live service game over the long haul. So the fact that ZeniMax Online Studios has a second MMO in development right now is actually not a huge surprise to me, given their track record of success in this genre. And I'm sure hitting the $2 billion mark also has Microsoft already salivating over the potential revenue a new ZeniMax MMO could bring. But what do we actually know about this game so far? Well, that's where things start getting more difficult, because even though ZOS has acknowledged that this title exists, I mean, they've had a post pinned on their X profile for over 3 years alluding to this, their entire organization is still extremely tight-lipped when it comes to what this game actually is. It's really only through a few random developer interviews and job postings on their website that we've been able to figure out that this is actually an MMO. But based on those job postings, statements made by a few key figures, and a bit of logical deduction, I think I have a really good idea of what this new title actually is, which we'll get into all the details of next. But any discussion about potential future projects for ZeniMax Online should definitely start with the studio's director, Matt Firer, who has briefly discussed the project, not really in terms of any official type of announcement, but more as a recruitment tool to help build up the studio over time. A very early mention of the project appears back in 2019 as part of his interview with Xbox Magazine, where he said, quote, "Not a lot of people have picked up on this, but if you look on our job site, you'll see that we are accepting applications for people to work on a new engine for a new AAA game. So yes, we have ideas, but we're committed to ESO for as long as it takes." The next major interview discussing this project came in 2023 when creative director Ben Jones appeared on the Product Builders podcast and gave a pretty decent breakdown of the initial stages of this game and the ZOS team behind it. He said that we're primarily known for the Elder Scrolls Online, which is an extension of the very well-established Elder Scrolls universe that we also publish here at Bethesda, but I am driving an independent team working on a new intellectual property, and I've been doing that for about 4.5 years. In terms of my responsibilities, as I hinted before, I'm responsible for a design team of about 50 people. We've got a development team of nearly 200 at this point, spread all over the globe. So myself, as well as my development management partners, manage the entirety of the project. That this is considerable investment and a very large scope project. We're creating a new IP, so a lot of that started with a background for a world, a vision for a high-level world that we are going to create, and to a degree, a story that we wanted to tell. The biggest beats of that existed before my time here. My job was to take those components and to really put flesh on the bone, to create a core team that understood what my bosses were seeking to create. The first two hires that we had on the team were a lead writer and what we call a lore master, someone who is responsible for the core tenets of the IP and all of the mythology that goes into the game. We work together along with our core creative team to establish what those core tenets are. We iterate on that. Our main story has changed 10 times in the last 4.5 years as we evolve what the product is. So not a lot of substantial details were given in this interview other than the team size of 200 plus, the fact that this was a new IP for ZeniMax, that there was considerable investment, a large scope to the project, which does sound, like an MMO essentially, and that a lead writer and lore master were some of the first hires to flesh out the lore and the main story of the game. Also, this confirms, a rough timeline for the development based on Ben's comment that he'd been working on the project for 4.5 years back in 2023. So roughly 2018 as a project start makes sense, though obviously pre-development could have started prior to that. What we know next comes mostly from job postings over on the ZeniMax Online Studios website. In fact, their job's main page was eventually updated to say the following: "We learned a lot bringing the world of the Elder Scrolls to life, and it's time for us to take those lessons to build a new AAA IP. The vision for our next game is grand in every sense of the word, and that's why we're developing a new engine to support the needs of the project and studio. Because we're in early pre-production, this is the perfect time to join us and make your mark on an incredible new project. Though we're seeking developers with experience in multiplayer, open world, and action RPGs, what we really want are passionate partners to join our growing family, especially those driven to do things the right way, through clear vision, constant communication, and determined iteration." If that sounds like you, review the careers page and etc. So this gives us a general understanding that yes, the new title is a new AAA IP or intellectual property, more on this later, that the new title is using a new engine, which is very interesting, and specifically they are looking for people with experience working in multiplayer, open world, and action RPGs. Again, all very similar to their current MMO title, The Elder Scrolls Online. Now, searching the job board further does give us some additional insight into the nature of this new title. Many of these jobs have since been filled, and so the posts are gone, but through the Internet Archive, you can still go back in time to see what that site looked like as far back as 2018 to see that some of these jobs were indeed for this new project. So let's go into some of the specifics of those jobs next. First up is the Senior Graphics and Animation Pipeline Engineer, and the job page for this states that ZeniMax Online Studios is seeking an experienced senior graphics and animation engineer to join our team as we develop an exciting new IP and all of the technology necessary to support our next AAA project, with the preferred skills of experience working on MMO or games as a service. So that as well confirms the MMO focus here and the long-term focus of the games as a service model, again very similar to ESO. Next, the lead technical designer job post is also very interesting. ZeniMax Online Studios is seeking a lead technical designer to join our studio for the development of our next AAA game. This is a chance to join an experienced group of developers in pre-production for a new IP, and the preferred skills are experience developing open world games and familiarity with third-person action or role-playing games, again, very much like the Elder Scrolls Online. Next is the Senior Project Manager position, and through this we know that just like ESO, this new game will be released on multiple platforms, including PC and consoles. As it says right there in the description, ZeniMax Online Studios is seeking a Senior Product Manager to help drive the development of our next AAA PC/console project. But obviously these are a bit generic so far, but we've also found some job postings for server engineers and even monetization designers, which all very much support this idea for their next title being another MMO along the lines of The Elder Scrolls Online. But there was one more job post that I was able to track down, which I think is extremely important when it comes to further narrowing down the scope or the direction of this game. So this is a job posting from several years ago called the Senior Vehicle Designer. ZeniMax Online Studios is seeking a Senior Vehicle Designer to join our studio for the development of our next AAA game. This is a chance to join an experienced group of developers in pre-production of a new IP. This role will serve under the lead systems designer to design and tune vehicle systems and movement mechanics and hone them to industry-leading quality. A developer in this role will serve as the project's vehicle specialist. They will collaborate with leads across all development disciplines to build a fun player-controlled vehicle and exciting vehicle gameplay in the game's many environments. They will also work on the systems for NPC-controlled vehicles. So we know this is for the same title because it's the same line about their next AAA game and being a new IP. But this to me is really telling because this makes the game sound modern in terms of setting and maybe even futuristic. I mean, if they were building ESO 2, they would obviously not need a vehicle specialist. We also know from this job posting that vehicles are going to factor in heavily to the new title's overall gameplay loop. It's going to be a big part of things. I mean, listen to this section again. They will collaborate with leads across all development disciplines to build a fun player-controlled vehicle and exciting vehicle gameplay in the game's many environments, and they will also work on the systems for NPC-controlled vehicles. So not only will players be able to control their own vehicles and likely customize them, but also players will interact with NPCs and their own vehicles, which to me definitely sounds like vehicle combat. So this is really the big reveal in terms of all the job postings that we've seen so far over the last, 4 to 5 years. Yes, the new title will be an MMO. It's going to be third-person action RPG. It's also going to have online servers and monetization and microtransactions, which is exactly the same as ESO, but it's also going to have a heavy focus on vehicle systems and again, most likely vehicle combat. So this one job title in itself really gives us some options now when we start to talk about what this mysterious new IP is that they've been, working on for a long time now. So the initial rumors that were going around years ago was that the new ZeniMax game was going to be a Star Wars game, even perhaps an MMO version of The Mandalorian. Now, those rumors started during the height of The Mandalorian's popularity as a TV show, and yeah, I would totally be down for a Mandalorian-themed MMO. That whole setting and vibe of being a space bounty hunter is the perfect setting for an MMO, definitely. Now, the other piece to that rumor is that one of ZeniMax's major hires during this time period was Colin Campbell as their content director, and he has a lot of experience working on Star Wars games, including Battlefront 2 and even Jedi Fallen Order. So yeah, there's definitely something to those Star Wars rumors, but when you get right down to it, would they really call a Star Wars MMO a quote new IP? I mean, when I think of Star Wars, I definitely do not think of it as being new, like at all. I guess technically speaking, it could be a new property for ZeniMax Online Studios, but still, the manipulation of that term, new IP, just to make a Star Wars game sound more interesting, doesn't seem like something ZeniMax would do in this situation. Plus, if it was a Star Wars title, I don't think they would be harping so much on the new IP aspect of this game the way they're doing in literally all of the job posting and interviews that we've seen so far. So if we know this new MMO is futuristic or sci-fi based because there's vehicles and likely vehicle combat, and it's not Star Wars, but it is quote new IP, I think there really is just one logical choice for what this game has to be. That's because ZeniMax and their partner Bethesda have a brand new sci-fi intellectual property all of their own called Starfield, and I think that is the option that makes the most sense for this game. So yeah, I do think this is going to be a Starfield MMO, and for a lot of other reasons as well. But let's start with the big man himself, Todd Howard, and a particular clip of him talking about Bethesda's franchises and how they have been expanding out to 2 types of games, single-player games and MMOs.
When 76 was introduced as this sort of live service product, for me, I thought a little bit of Elder Scrolls Online, like, okay, this will be sort of the thing that's supported for a while, and we might not see a new actual Fallout entry for some time as like Bethesda goes to work on other stuff. Is there ever a fear or a trepidation from Bethesda Game Studios that these, like a Fallout game from a mainline entry, can't stand side by side with 76? And I guess that kind of ties into Elder Scrolls as well, because you've gotten these spin-offs, for example, since ESO, but we haven't seen like a mainline entry since then. Is there this kind of concern of like, can we have 2 Fallout games existing at once or 2 Elder Scrolls games existing at once? Or do you want to just, I mean, was this part of the plan? Like, let 76 cook, get its legs, and get to a point now where it's doing the best it has ever been?
That's a really good question. And when you're sort of starting those things, but we have that fear as well. Is one game going to cannibalize another? think the good news is, as long as like the initial releases are spread out a little bit, they don't. They both find their audiences, right? Like Skyrim is still one of our most played games, while Elder Scrolls Online is celebrating their 10th anniversary and doing really well. We've noticed even when we update those games, they don't really cannibalize each other. And then you see it with Fallout 4 kind of hitting #1 on the charts, and then 76 right behind it. And so, I mean, logic would say there's a little bit of cannibalization between the two, but much, much less in practice than we thought between these games. So
this is really interesting because I think it explains the most logical game plan for Bethesda's mainline franchises in terms of reaching the most players possible and of course making the most money possible is to have single player titles and then when the time is right, introduce an MMO version of that franchise to eventually stand side by side with it. Now obviously they started this with Skyrim and then the Elder Scrolls Online 10 years ago, and then he mentioned Fallout 4 and Fallout 76. And yeah, Bethesda obviously paid a bit of a price initially for pushing out Fallout 76 maybe before it was ready, but when you look at it now, Fallout 76 and the Fallout franchise in general is the most popular and the most healthy that it's ever been. When you think about it, you could even add a third type of game, I suppose, to that equation when you talk about mobile games. The Fallout franchise actually was first there with the Fallout Shelter game, which is pretty solid and a popular title. Then they also just released Elder Scrolls Castles, which is their interpretation, of an Elder Scrolls mobile game. So yeah, you basically have these 3 platforms or buckets by which Bethesda franchises live by, that being the single-player RPG, the MMO, and then the mobile game. But both Elder Scrolls and Fallout have completely fulfilled that trifecta for now, having all 3 types of games under their belt, and now they're actually circling back to the single-player titles again, right? Elder Scrolls 6 might release in the next 3 to 4 years if we're lucky, and I know Fallout 5 is at least being discussed for now, but that leaves us with this completely new franchise for Bethesda, and that is truly a new IP, and that is Starfield. Starfield was a new IP back in 2018 when this MMO started its pre-production. Starfield is still a new IP now technically, and is just about to receive its first story DLC. But just logically speaking as well, this new ZeniMax project being a Starfield MMO, it checks all the boxes in terms of what these Bethesda properties do over their lifetime. We're just seeing it at the very start of its life cycle. And this matches really well with the job title positions we've seen for this new AAA IP, particularly the senior vehicle designer position. Starfield has ships obviously, but they also just released their new land vehicle system into the game, so yeah, the fact that Starfield has both ship combat and exploration, and now vehicle combat and exploration, matches up perfectly with what this new MMO seems to be focused on. But I have an even crazier idea when it comes to how this new MMO could potentially fit into the Starfield timeline and universe, and it's almost a one-to-one parallel when it compares to how ZeniMax developed their first MMO, The Elder Scrolls Online. Now first you need to know that The Elder Scrolls as a series has different time periods, which it calls eras. So there's essentially 4 eras across Elder Scrolls history, with most of the modern single-player games being relatively close to each other, at least in terms of that overall timeline. You've got The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, essentially the most modern, as it takes place towards the end of the 4th era of Tamriel. Then there's Daggerfall, Morrowind, even Oblivion, all taking place during the 3rd era of Tamriel's history. But then we have The Elder Scrolls Online, taking place much further back in time before any of the other single-player titles, all the way back in the 2nd era. So hundreds of years essentially before any of the mainline games take place. Now the team at ZeniMax, again the developers of ESO, Bethesda didn't develop ESO, ZeniMax did. So the ZOS team have talked about this at length before, but basically establishing the game into this earlier 2nd era timeline was an important choice for them because it gave them the most options to write about events that didn't interfere with any of the single-player game story events. It also let them write about past circumstances which were not fully explained in those main games or were otherwise shrouded with mystery. I mean, think about it, this makes a lot of sense from a game development perspective because it gives them the ability to, yes, honor the lore of the mainline games, but also to fill in any gaps for content that was never written with their own unique lore and their own unique content and voice. Again, this is a different studio from Bethesda after all. Yes, they do collaborate extensively together on the lore of the universe, but they also each want to tell their own separate and unique stories within the framework of that universe, and this is what we've seen for the past 10 years with ESO. So following that model, going back to Starfield's universe, it obviously doesn't have as long of a history as the Elder Scrolls franchise, but it does have a sense of a timeline or even eras if you use that Elder Scrolls terminology, which is apparent in the lore of Starfield and the events of the game. Now, the Starfield single-player game we know, for example, takes place in more of a modern era, the year 2330, which would be comparable to like the 4th era of Tamriel when the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim takes place. But then Starfield also references Earth as early as 2050, and you even get to visit old Earth and you get the sense of the creation of space, time travel, and the older technologies that happened back then. So yeah, basically we have a 300-year or so period of time that a Starfield MMO could be placed within. Now there is a really interesting period within that 300 years, which we never experienced while playing the game, but it is spoken about at length in the Starfield lore. And if you completely explore New Atlantis, there is even a museum which explains the events further, and that's the Colony Wars of roughly 2307. Now yeah, that's not a big year difference between the Starfield single-player game and this period of time, but the Colony War is also an extremely interesting period of history, and it could serve as the perfect launching point for an MMO story, in my opinion. During the Starfield Colony War, you have two unique factions warring against each other, in this case the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective. So two different planets, two different starting points, two different cultures, which could serve as potential background choices for our characters. And the Colony War actually reminds me a lot of the Alliance War in Cyrodiil during the Second Era, which frames the story of the Elder Scrolls Online. And clearly, building your MMO around different factions at war in the past era works really well for ZeniMax, and they could easily do it again here. Now, it's almost guaranteed that PvP will be included into this new MMO as well. I can't imagine a world where they wouldn't include PvP, so going back to that Colony War idea also gives us two warring factions at a minimum, where it's really easy to just pit those factions against each other, toss them into some maps, and now you have PvP content as well. Now, my tinfoil hat might be showing just a bit, but it is an interesting coincidence that ESO just redid their entire PvP battleground system this year, and they actually changed it significantly from a 3-team system to represent the 3 alliances of Cyrodiil down into a 2-team system. And now we know from interviews that they've been working on this for several years, updating the PvP battleground system. That just makes sense that they would use any technology or lessons learned here to apply to future PvP in future MMOs. So yeah, I would not be surprised at all to see battlegrounds of some type, and of course open world PvP featured in a Starfield MMO as well. But what I really hope comes out of the Starfield MMO, if that's what we're actually getting, is more mechs and xenomorphs. So as you play Starfield and advance through the main story, there's all this lore about the Colony War and how mechs and xenomorphs were used to wreak havoc on the opposing factions. As we play the game, we see, the ruins of these giant mech building facilities and how they had to eventually outlaw both mechs and xenomorphs because they were just too powerful. So yeah, that would be an awesome feature to add into this MMO universe as well, and the backstory and the lore is already there waiting to be used. But yeah, the Colony War storyline is fantastic, and the Starfield single-player game barely scratches the surface because all of that is in the past, so it's the perfect environment for a new MMO as well. And again, the time periods are far enough apart that Bethesda can continue to write Starfield story DLCs for years into the future. We know that they're doing that already with Shattered Space and potentially a Starborn DLC in the next year. And then ZeniMax can have a free-for-all in Starfield's past, continuing to adapt and evolve the lore that Bethesda created there for the MMO game. So if you couldn't tell by now, I've pretty much made up my mind that the next game from ZeniMax will be Starfield Online. And yeah, I could definitely be wrong. I've been wrong before plenty of times. I don't have any insider information, just, my own logical thinking, but this choice really makes the most sense for the future of the studio and of course for the Starfield franchise and even Bethesda. In terms of timelines, we still don't have any more official information on the game's release or even alphas or betas. We could guess that pre-production started, like I said, around 2018 to 2019. We also know that the Elder Scrolls Online had a very long development cycle, about 7 years in total. And of course, games are taking even longer to develop these days. Now, I haven't really talked about consoles yet, but ZOS is very big on console releases for their games and has worked really hard to keep ESO alive and kicking, and even on the last gen consoles for Xbox and PlayStation. Now, that's definitely been sort of a thorn in their side, as the last generation of consoles has definitely made it harder for them to add in new features for future expansions. So whether or not they will support this current generation of consoles, or just wait until the next gen, is definitely a big decision that they're going to have to make for this new MMO. I mean, if they do wait for whatever is coming next from Xbox and PlayStation, we're looking at maybe 2027, maybe 2028 to see a console release for this game. But of course, a PC release would definitely come first, just to give them time to build up their audience and continue to add content to the game. So my guess would be 2026 would be the earliest release time frame that we would see for this one. But let me know what you all think down in the comment section below. Is my assessment of a Starfield MMO accurate in your opinion, or do you think ZeniMax Online's new game is something completely different? I would love to hear what you think. Shout out to War Thunder again for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to check out War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox, and use my link in the pinned comment or video description to register. Those of you who are new or haven't played for 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms, including multiple premium vehicles, in-game currency, and more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you around in the next video.